Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for coming. I'm very excited about being here, so I hope that you all are as well. It's an absolute pleasure to be in sunny Batam. Today we're going to be looking at teaching EMI. When we're teaching EMI, we're not teaching English, but we're teaching in English, yeah? So I'm going to give you some ideas on different methodologies that we can use in the classroom to help you teach in English. Just very quickly before we start, we started anyway, but that's fine. Very quickly before we start, do you all teach EMI at the moment? Are you all teaching in English or trying to teach in English on EMI programs? Teaching in English. What are some of the challenges that you face in the classroom with your students? What are some of the barriers that you face teaching in English in the classroom?
The motivation of from student.
The lack of motivation to speak in English? Why do you think they lack motivation?
Because they are too scared to speak. Because they are afraid to make mistake.
Yes, yeah.
Because English their memory comes like very hard for them.
Yes, yes. And do your students, all of you, do your students have a good level of English? Yeah. Okay, okay. And when you say a very low level, does that mean that you can't really teach in English all of the time?
Yeah.
So you need to translate. So how do you mix? Do you speak English and then repeat in Indonesian? Okay. Okay. So I've been working, as you know, on the British Council funded project, and we've collated a lot of data, working with different polytechnics, and I'll show you the names in a minute. And we've come up with a lot of information. And yes, it's challenging. The students have low levels of English. Sometimes you're having to translate materials from Indonesian into English, and some of you don't have the skills because you're not official translators. So the information being translated is incorrect or perhaps not accurate enough as it should be. So it is a challenge. So what we're going to do, I know that we can't change one symposium, me standing here for 2 hours is not going to change the delivery of EMI tomorrow. It's a process that's going to take a long time. I have other initiatives that I've been talking with Dwi here about for POLIBATAM and also with the ILO and the ministry. So we're looking at other things we can do to help facilitate delivering in English. So what I'm going to do today will help you to deliver in English. You'll see the methodologies that we use, and they're not subject specific. They're pre-teaching language specific. And one of the things that I found to be most helpful for practitioners is to understand that you don't need to translate. Can anyone tell me why we wouldn't need to translate? Do you know all of your own Indonesian language, everything that you need to know? Do you know everything? No. What kind of language, maybe, Dwi, do you not know? What language do you perhaps not use in an everyday?
Sometimes we get like them the thing that is English and like this just for this.
Yes.
So you really don't know the for that.
It's okay. Well, I hope that I speak quite good English, yeah, but I don't know all the subject terms if I was a car mechanic. I go to the garage and they speak to me in English. It's my language. And he tells me names of things in my car. When I don't know what they are, he has to show me them or he has to explain to me. He doesn't need to translate it into another language because I don't understand it in my own language. Yeah. So we need to understand the terms and the vocabulary in the working language. And the working language in an EMI classroom is English. Yeah. Why do you believe that you're teaching in English? What's the reason? What's the motivation for teaching in English?
Enrich my students. So if I teach in English, so really they have to speak in English well, in order to improve their vocabulary. That's one of my goals to teach in English, and to make them get used to teaching, get used to use English as medium communication.
Why are you trying to get them used to speaking English? Why English and not French, or why not Indonesian? Why English?
Definition of language. It's the language.
And you're sorry? Are you preparing now I know you're not all from Batam, but are you preparing your students to only work in the local economy? Ah, so what globally?
Globally.
Globally. And globally, we need to use, unfortunately, the international language, which is English. So that's the motivation. And it all ties in with the ministry's vision for, I think it's 2045, being global, competitive globally. And we need to use the English language to do so. It's the international language. Don't ever tell an English speaking person this. Does anyone know English people and English speaking people will actually say this is not correct? Why is English the international language?
Because it's just globally.
Why though? Sorry? Yes, but why? The grammar. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So English is seen to be grammatically more compact, shorter, and an easier language to learn. Yeah. So that's why we don't really change globally to Mandarin, because it's probably the most spoken language in the world, but it's really complicated and complex to learn. And English, theoretically, I know that no language is easy to learn because I've had to learn other languages, but English is grammatically and structurally shorter and simpler. But we know it's not simple. Okay. Not for anyone. And the most important thing about learning any language is you need to use it and you need to practice it. You use it and you practice it as much as possible, and then the embarrassment disappears. Can you think of how to get your students to forget about being embarrassed and not making mistakes? What could we do? Dwayne and I were speaking about this yesterday. What could you do in your polytechnics for your students to allow them to practice English and forget about making mistakes? Any ideas?
Not hesitate in thinking was whether they're making mistakes.
I'm quite a good English and Spanish speaker, but I make mistakes sometimes. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's practice. Perhaps you could have a classroom one lunchtime a week, and it could just be for English conversation. You may not need to have a lecturer, a teacher, or a supervisor there, but you can give them an idea, you can give them a topic. They all sit together, they're all of the same level, they're all students, and they just communicate. And you'll get peer collaboration from your stronger students helping the weaker students, and everybody learns. So there's different ways that we can get our students to try to forget about feeling embarrassed and making mistakes. If we put them all together, all at the same level, friends amongst friends, they don't see anyone as being at a higher level, then it allows them to relax and communicate and make lots of mistakes, because we all do anyway when we're learning a language. So we'll start with the presentation, and I've come from the city of Glasgow College, and it's sunny and dry in Glasgow today. And we're here because of the British Council Innovation Grant, which has allowed us to... Next, hopefully. This one. Is it on? Is it off? Okay. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you. I'll give you a little bit of history, and I'm sure that you probably know an awful lot more about this than I do. So the British Council Innovation Grant, basically we developed a project about EMI in teaching and to identify some of the challenges faced in the EMI classroom and then try to address some of these challenges to minimise them. But it's a long-term project. It's not something that finishes tomorrow and EMI is effective. This is a long process about learning language and using resources. So the history of English as a medium of instruction, EMI, was introduced as a subject into Indonesian secondary schools in 1967. That was quite a long time ago. And by the late 80s had become the preferred foreign language in the vast majority of schools. Due to changes of government and institutional changes, English being used as EMI has been prioritised, it's been forgotten, it's been prioritised, and now it's prioritised again, and it's part of the vision for 2045 of the Indonesian government. It was introduced as a primary school subject in 1990, and some schools even began using English as a teaching medium for science subjects. So that's at primary school level, okay? So there's a long history, there's an even longer history of the English language, but there's a long history of EMI, all the way back to 1967. Some of you will have been taught, have you all had English language training from the day that you started school? No. When did you more or less start your English language training? High school. Secondary. Secondary. High school, secondary. High school's probably quite Scottish. Okay, secondary, yeah. High school is secondary. Do you will correct me? So yes. So at secondary school, 11, 12 years old? Yes. And how many hours of English would you have studied from 12 years old? Every day? Every week?
Once.
Okay, so very little. How was English taught to you? Because I remember being at school and I remember learning French, German, Spanish. And in the UK, they give you a textbook for language.
They give us a list of available.
Do you think that using a text, this is something that I'm really passionate about. I talk about this. Sometimes my family will let Norma, you're not at work now. Do you think that using a textbook for language is the way to learn a language? Okay. Hmm.
in our country, this is